of our two-part learning community series on resiliency and restorative practices with Kelly Rizzi as our major presenter. And we're just delighted to have Kelly with us. And we have a nice round table of people here today in Reading. This is our hub today. Last week on the 1st, our hub was in Lake County. And so this is the first time that we've tried doing our learning community in two mini sessions of 2 hours each. We generally have one session of about 4 hours. And so we're experimenting a little bit, but we are just absolutely delighted that Kelly is willing to work with us in both of these sessions. And I know that if you were a participant in part 1, you're looking forward to part 2. So I'm not going to go into the typical introduction because we did that in the first part for strategies, other than to say that we're very appreciative to the Office of Child Abuse Prevention because they are the major funder for Strategies 2.0. And we have 3 basic pathways through which we implement the services of Strategies 2.0. There are many trainings that are offered, and you can go to the Strategy CA website and see all of the trainings that are available. You could even request a training if you would like on a topic that may not already be listed or being presented. And we have consulting, and then we have these learning communities. And the learning communities are divided up in regions throughout the state. And this is the northern region, and we have 12 counties who participate in this northern region. So I'm not going to say much more than that because we want to turn the time over to Kelly and give her as much time as possible to talk to us about restorative practices. So thank you very much for your participation. We know that we have folks in Lake County. We know that at our remote location, we know that we have folks here at the hub, and we know that we have several folks online, and we really welcome all of you online. We know that we've got pretty good representation through our northern region. I think we've got some folks from Humboldt, some folks from Del Norte, some folks from Siskiyou, some folks from Plumas, so Mendocino Lake. So we're reaching out into the region, and that's what a learning community is designed to do, to try to infuse some of these best practices broadly through the region. So people have tools to be able to work with in their community across sectors, whether it's a school. We're really focusing on schools, tried to do this from 3:30 to 5:30 so schools could participate, but we're looking broadly across our communities for participation with utilizing these practices. So Kelly, thank you very much.
Okay.
We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, well, welcome everyone. We're excited to spend the next couple of hours together. We will take a formal break at 4:30, about a 5 to 8 minute break, so you can expect that. But to get us started today, we last week we talked about the stress response system. We talked a little bit about the ACEs study and got into the science of the brain. And what I'm going to do in just a minute is go back and review just one slide, one really key important slide, because it's pretty foundational for the work that as we move forward. But for this afternoon, we're mostly going to look at resilience building. We're going to look at classroom practices, things that, so for those of you who are educators that are tuning in, and we're going to look at restorative practices. Now, restorative practices in some circles is called restorative justice. What we typically know is that restorative justice is a lot of times seen as something that's done after a crime or after a wrongdoing has occurred, whereas restorative practices is a preventative practice that you're doing ahead of time to try to prevent events from occurring. So to get us started, like we did last time, if you would, wherever you are, if you're sitting at your computer alone, if you would, or if you're with colleagues, if you would just take a couple minutes, 2 or 3 minutes to turn and talk to someone near you. What's the best thing in the last week or so, personal or professional, that has happened for you in your life? Take some time to share in that way.
I know exactly. I made my very lavish party.
I'll share what happened today.
Car I ever bought.
That's a
That
great
had
feeling.
14 miles on it when I purchased it, and now I'm just under 99,000. So,
Well, that's a great feeling.
yeah, I already got
So
my
what were they
title
working on?
email, and it's
We
going to
did
be
a
so
STEM
rich.
lesson. Design.
Well, for me, I have a one-month-old first grandchild.
Oh, that sounds wonderful.
Friday, daughter,
So
and her
the
friends all
rock, was
had
it
tickets to a concert.
are they
in
painted
Sacramento.
or?
They
And
just
she
know it
not
was just a
about- she
regular
didn't want to
rock,
miss it,
and
and
then
she was kind of
some
torn. I
of
said,
them
I'll just go with you.
did draw on it, and others
So I
just
had
left
them all
it
to
natural.
myself.
So they had just different kind of materials out,
They
and
get
they
overfed.
decided to
I love it.
I was like, okay, he's crying. I know when he kind of starts.
So I'm not in the classroom right now, so.
My daughter
So I
came
I'm
home,
not
she
having an
goes,
opportunity.
he really had all those
One of
bottles.
the
I
things
go,
I
yep.
have to
And he was just
things
passed
that-
out.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, so, yeah, I love brought too much though.
No, that's all good. I'm happy to.
Did you get to share
Yeah,
some?
it's pretty amazing. So,
Well, he goes on the ocean now. Those fishes
she's
are
recovering very,
I
very
do
well.
love
It was amazing.
I
took the Puget Sound.
What?
That's not, so different, because you're in a sound, right?
Oh,
I can't imagine in the ocean.
It was. We usually go.
Wow.
That's where my boys have been at with them. So they can grab these and all the crabs. So
None that kayak.
Ah,
Wisconsin.
Really?
they drop their pots. And then they come back in and back in and go back out.
In the flats. That's cool. They have a place to work.
It's been all outfitted and let me tell you.
Okay, especially when on the ocean, I guess they would have it there.
He's so cool. He's always looking for reasons I never get done. Gotta have that too. Okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
Is it different crab?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
that's even better.
I love it. He's fresh. He's been fishing since we got married. So we've always had fresh stuff.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's the best for you too.
So good.
Way up now.
She get tired of that.
Right, she had no, and she had no communication. She's just she's very young. It's very stressful.
so you didn't know at the time it was a stroke. You just knew something had happened.
I just knew it was a stroke.
So.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
So we've been eating, female.
Wow.
And it
Oh.
was really, they got there, and
Yeah.
These are
they
living
gave her
well.
that really strong clot blood, TPA, which you only have a certain.
Thank goodness. Wow. Okay, so can we all come back? Bring us all back? Okay. Are we back live? Okay. So as we talked about last time, that's a really intentional practice. It gets you into your body. It gets you talking to somebody near you in a safe way. We're relational creatures, and it helps to relax the brain, and it creates great synergy in the room. And I heard some great stories. It's great. But the other thing that we know really helps, and we learned this last time, is how helpful it is to do a specific intentional kind of breathing where you breathe for the count of 2 into your belly. And I just wanted to invite all of us just to take a couple breaths, because we've all come from, this is the end of our day, and you're rock stars for tuning in and for coming here, hanging out with us to talk about this, because this is the work that changes lives. And so we're the change agents, right? You are, every one of you is. So let's just give ourselves the gift of just taking 2 deep cleansing breaths into the belly, do the 2 count breathing, and just relax, settle into where we are. Okay, now that we're all present in our bodies, I just want to review one slide. So we're going to go back from last time. Whoop, back. Stay. This is the slide. I forgot to bring a book with me last week, and I realized it after I was on the road. So I want to share an excerpt with you. This is an amazing book. It's called The Resilience Breakthrough, 27 Tools for Turning Adversity into Action. And actually, A foster youth coordinator in Sonoma County gave me this book. Well, actually, this is Stephanie's book, but my book was given to me, and then everybody in our county bought this book and is reading it because it's so great. But I wanted to just review, in case you weren't with us last time, this critical biology of how the brain works, how if you're an educator, if you're a social worker, it doesn't matter if you're a parent, if we ever want to reach people in the upper regions of their brain, in their cortex, the prefrontal cortex, the only physiological way to do that is through the lower regions of the brain. And I know that if I'm not regulated and I try to deal with my 3-year-old, if I try to walk into a classroom full of 6th graders, the experience is very different than if I take a breath, do my regulation. I have a visualization that I do that it's snowing, but I'm near a fire, so I'm warm, and I do my breathing. And that grounds me, that resets me, that helps me to show up and be fully present and calm. So we know that we are powerful contagions, and if I'm regulated, it gives everybody around me permission to be regulated. But then we also explicitly teach people about regulation. Last Wednesday when we were in Lake County, the very next morning, I was with, at 8:30 in the morning, I was with, at our juvenile facility here in Shasta County, we have our lower risk offenders and then our higher risk offenders. And I got to spend the morning with our higher risk offenders, the youth who, you know, are living in a facility against their wishes, who most of them made choices, inappropriate choices when they had flipped lids. In that moment where they lost access to the cognitive abilities up in the upper regions, and they were down here operating down in this brain area, they made decisions that caused them to then be housed in a juvenile facility for a period of time. So I got to talk with them. Oh, repeat the title of the book. The Resilience Breakthrough. And the author is Christian Moore. The Resilience Breakthrough. So what I found compelling was, here I am with these, and they only have boys in the high risk pod because there have been sexual offenses. And so I got to spend the time with them, and these boys asked if they could have paper to take notes. They wanted to know what they could do to get control of their lives, because when I shared with them the statistic that we talked about last week about, we know that over 50% of prison inmates were identified as preschoolers as being hyperactive and or ADHD because they don't have the ability to self-regulate. And I help them understand, look, this is a life skill. If you have the ability to self-regulate, your life will be very different. Your experiences in life will be very different. And I talked about the addiction to heroin and methamphetamine and alcoholism and in our community, and how those individuals, and I mean, you know, and how they use language. And they started, they right away they were like, yeah, I get high, and and they started identifying the external tools they use to calm themselves down. So it was fascinating to me how interested they were in learning about breathing, in learning about heartbeat, in learning about cross-lateral movements, in learning about any kind of isometrics, the things we talked about last time, as internal ways of self-regulating. So it is, this is wisdom for everyone of all ages. Whoops. So this whole magic around us as adults remaining regulated is something that is a lifelong work of mine, and I hope that every day I get a little bit better at it. My son is has been an opportunity for me to really put this into practice, because he is so bright and he's so strong-willed and he's so determined to have his way. But I wanted to read to you. It'll be 2 or 3 minutes of a reading, but it's such a powerful example of how it feels to be in that moment where someone has pushed you to your very edge, and how you take a breath and you remain calm, and the power in doing that, the act of actually doing that. I'm going to take a drink before I start reading. The first time, and this is from the author, Christian Moore, the first time I realized the power of relational resilience, my face was covered in spit. Several years ago, I was working as a counselor in a group home with some pretty rough kids. One night, I was taking them bowling, a rare privilege that had them pretty excited. It was up to me to make sure they all cleaned and vacuumed their rooms before we could go, and everyone had finished and was ready. Everyone except a young man named Sam. He flat out refused to clean his room, swearing at me and insulting me the more I tried to negotiate with him. I pulled the van around to the front of the house, knowing the others were counting on me to get Sam to move so they could enjoy a night out. I was starting to get desperate. So I loaded the kids into the van and pointed out to Sam that he was making them wait. As I climbed in behind them, listening to them telling Sam to hurry up, their expressions turned panicked, and they started pointing to something right behind my head. Mr. Moore, they cried. Turn around, turn around. In my mind's eye, I saw a baseball bat or a golf club waiting to clock me in the back of my head, but it was way worse than that. When I cautiously climbed out of the van and turned around, Sam's scowling face was inches away from mine. He made that disgusting noise, the one that comes when you're pulling up snot from the back of your throat, and spit in my face. Huge, warm, dripping spit. It oozed down my forehead, my hair, on my eyebrow. It covered my face. But when I felt the warm, disgusting snot sitting on my lip, I lost it. I can't even imagine. Being OCD about germs was bad enough, but I'd been conditioned by the environment where I grew up in, that spitting in someone's face was the ultimate disrespect. It could literally get you killed. I distinctly remember feeling my body tingle with rage. I felt it from my toes clear up to my spine. My hands made a fist purely as a reflex. There was a stucco wall about 20 feet away, and in that moment, all I could visualize was dragging Sam's face across it. This all happened within a half second, and I knew I had to get control fast. So I went from straight rage to saying to myself, Christian, calm down. The week before, I had seen this child's psychological history, and it flashed through my mind as I tried to get myself under control. He'd come from a horrible situation and had been through a tremendous amount of pain. As I looked at this young man, I flipped the switch. He talks about flipping the switch throughout the book, so it's connected to that. In a single moment, I went from almost uncontrolled rage to careful calm, instituting damage control that would not only affect me, but also all those kids that night that depended on me. If I had retaliated, I could have lost my ability to be a social worker. But more important, I would have taught the kids in the van to strike back. I would have hurt Sam and reinforced to him that what the world had taught him to do his whole life, to hurt those who hurt you, which only leads to more pain. So instead of retaliating, I wiped Sam's spit off my face with my hand, took a deep breath, there you go, breath, and said, look, I understand why you just spit in my face. If I had a life like yours, I would be spitting in someone's face too. Sam started shaking like a leaf, and I asked, every time you spit in someone's face your whole life, what happened? We'd start fighting, Sam retorted. When Sam spit in my face, he was 100% sure that we were going to fight. He looked at me and shouted, Mr. Moore, you're weak. You're a sissy. I disrespect you. I just disrespected you and you didn't do anything. The other kids were still sitting behind us in the van, expressions of shock on their faces. To be honest, I was just as shocked because I didn't know I could control my anger like that. I realized that this was an important moment for us, especially me. I had to stay in control of my emotions if I was going to spend my career helping others. I looked Sam in the eye and declared, listen, if you lined up 100 people and you punched or spit at all of them, 99 would probably punch or spit back. But the one person that doesn't, he's 10 times stronger than the other 99. If you always hit back, you have no future. It takes no strength, no backbone to fight back. Hitting back is simply human nature. You hurt me, I'm going to hurt you. It takes all the strength I have not to fight back. I took Sam in the house that evening and counseled him for about 20 minutes before loading the van and heading to the bowling alley. He calmed down, apologized to me, and had tremendous respect for me after that. For the rest of his time in the group home, he tried to show empathy and self-control and reminded others to do so as well. What stopped me from reacting that day and helped me stay in control of my emotions? It was the knowledge that those kids, including Sam, depend on me. Imagine the cost if I hadn't used the kids' dependence on me as a reason to be resilient in that moment. What if I'd forgotten in my rage how much this child needed me? When others are depending on you, you do what it takes and find strength you didn't even know you had. Even when you really, really, really want to, you simply don't give in or give up. This is one important aspect of relational resilience, which is what we're going to talk about today. So, man, such a powerful situation in life where someone could easily tip and he didn't. But I will tell you that my colleagues and I, we've been doing this work for years, and it's little by little that you pave pathways in your cortex, in your prefrontal cortex, so that you have automaticity with knowing to breathe, with knowing to pause before you act or before you speak. So, but the good news is the brain is elastic, and the more that we put our focus on this and the more that we talk about it, the better we get. So I'm going to catch us up to today. We're going to talk about the role of the adult. We as adults have such tremendous impact on the lives of the young people who we spend time with. So I know that last week this PowerPoint was shared with you, and I'm not sure if you can see that or not, and I typically don't read slides, but I think I'm going to read it for those of you that may not be able to see it as clearly. This is an excerpt from a really great book, Fostering Resilient Learners. Great classroom examples of what it looks like to deal with challenging kids who come from trauma. As I'm reading, just listen to hear if there are golden lines or if there are things that are compelling to you or that resonate with you. When students are in survival mode, their brains are delivering a message that their bodies must respond to. Their behaviors, which are disruptive and often inappropriate, are simply manifestations of what their bodies have been trained to do to survive. Most of these students are, in essence, having normal reactions to not okay things. As educators and caregivers, many of us were taught to respond to the behavior in front of us. We learned about developmentally appropriate behaviors and effective classroom management techniques. As a result, many of us associate behaviors with choice. I am now challenging you to look beyond the behavior and focus on the motive. If we can identify what may be motivating students to react, we can redirect them by providing alternative options for them to manage their stress. So wherever you are in this room, out in whatever city or placement you are, if you would just take a few minutes and talk at your table groups, what stood out to you the most? What were the phrases or lines that really resonated that made you think, huh, or made you question? So we'll take about 3 or 4 minutes to talk. What do you think, guys?
This one.
This one, okay.
What stood out to you, Jessica?
I just like the sentence, the behaviors are simply manifestations of what their bodies have been, how they've been trained to, what they've been trained to do to survive.
Yeah.
That sticks out to me as well. I think it's sometimes, as a person who works with foster youth and foster parents, it's really easy to take things so personally, especially when children live in the home.
Yes.
It's daily ongoing.
Yes.
And in the classroom as well, I imagine.
Yeah.
It's a long time to be in one place.
Right, right. Trudy, what about you?
The first sentence for sure, about being in survival mode, and similar to what she said, the fact that when you are in survival mode, you will do what has worked for you in the past. Probably won't work in any other setting but home, but you still then that's kind of your go-to.
Right. Yep,
Response.
exactly.
I like the looking beyond the behavior and focus on the motive. I don't know if that was said a moment ago because I was talking.
No, but yeah,
It definitely is the whys.
if you can figure out the why, what's the antecedent? Yeah, get ahead of it. unfortunately, a lot of people, by the time they get to that, are so jaded and burnt out. I was with a teacher today who was like, 20 more days with him. I just want the year to be over. I'm like, well, wait a minute. Let's try these strategies. Wait, but what about this? But yet a lot of teachers are working in isolation in their classrooms, and they feel alone. Yeah, so and they can talk to somebody and source ideas as to what's underneath the behavior. Makes a difference. All right, shall we bring our folks back on? All right, thank you. Yeah, we're good. Okay, so hopefully you had a good conversation wherever you were. We were some people talked about how when a student's in survival mode, their brain delivers a message. And we know that for kids from trauma, because the brain is a pattern seeker, if we're talking about a child who lives in a home where there's toxic stress, and their brain and body gets set into a pattern of becoming hyper-aroused, that's the kind of kid who, without thinking, when somebody comes up and hits them from behind, is going to go right into fight mode. Or if you're a student whose typical behavior is to disassociate, then right away your body's going to go into that mode of response when your fear response system has been triggered. And it isn't as though they're making a conscious decision in that moment. Their brain and body is just going into that space. So I liken it to my black lab. I have 2 labs, and my female black lab is a fierce huntress. Not that we take her hunting, but there's anything that moves in our backyard and she is on it. She took this beautiful tail off an alligator lizard last night. I was so sad. It went running past me.
It'll regrow.
They regrow. They regrow. I know, they grow back. But I was like, oh, he was so beautiful. So Ranger, her name's Ranger, my son and I are gardening, and the minute I heard the sound, I knew what it was. We have a tree in the corner of the yard that overhangs, and there was a baby bird's nest in the tree, and one of the birds fell out. And so I'm running as fast as I can across the yard, screaming her name, Ranger, Ranger, no, Ranger, Ranger, trying to get her to stop, come back, because I knew she was going for the bird. And you know, I think about like her DNA, she came coded to like get the bird. She's supposed to hunt. I think how much of my voice could Ranger hear while she was running across the yard to get to that bird? 0. In the same way that a child who's been tipped, whether you're in a group home setting, whether you're in a school site, wherever you are, they really do, many of them lose control of that cognitive part of their brain to stop, put on the brakes, make a good decision. So where that kind of reaches conflict is that in some schools, it's changing little by little. They have these policies where if this, then this. If you punch someone, this is the consequence. If you do this, this is the consequence. Well, you knew the rules. We spelled it out for you. If you do this, this is the consequence. You did this, so you're suspended for 5 days. See you later. And what we know is that that doesn't work. We know that for kids who have been diagnosed with ADHD and kids from trauma, the chemical cocktail going on up here is completely different, biologically speaking, than in a normalized child. And that those behavior management plans don't work with them. We have to think outside the box, and that's where restorative practices comes in. Thank goodness for restorative practices. All right, so, but I want to pause for a minute. This is a brain break. It comes from the book that I shared last time. It's amazing how powerful humming can be. So you can use humming in a few different ways. You can hum your favorite songs, hum together as a class, or even have humming conversations where you hum words instead of speaking with one another. Humming is beneficial as it forces you to take a deep breath and slowly exhale as you breathe out. Humming vibrates your voice, so it relaxes that vagal nerve, and it loosens facial muscles where you hold your stress, where when you're tense, anger, or stressed. So what's a song, ladies, that you think we all know?
If you're happy and you know it.
Okay. If you're happy and you know it. So we're going to hum if you're happy and you know it. And, you know, wherever you are in whatever city, decide with your group or you can hum with us if you're happy and you know it. Just hum with us. All right, here we go. Ready? And then you could go on. It's fun. I mean, that honestly took us maybe 20 seconds. I love to do this in the middle of a classroom when I know that maybe kids are starting to feel tense, or if I'm about to teach a concept that I know is going to stress them a little bit, I'll just go into humming with them. We'll hum, it's silly, it's goofy, it creates those endorphins, and now we're reset, and now we can go on. So that's our little brain break. Okay, so this is yes?
What age range would you say that?
Great question. Gosh, preschool all the way through 8th grade. Those are the classrooms I'm in most.
Okay.
I haven't tried it in high school yet, so I don't know.
Thank you.
Good question. This next slide is also one of those that is such a gift of knowledge for us. This is a concept that I use in my life now, and it's amazing. This slide is to remind us of a couple of things, but mostly we want to talk about a term. It's called parallel placement, and it's a term that we learned from Dr. Perry. Stephanie and I are both trained in the neurosequential model of education. And parallel placement means when you have a young person who is about to flip their lid or who is becoming emotionally dysregulated, the last thing you want to do is go face to face to that child, because the brain doesn't know the difference between a real threat and a perceived threat. And when you go eyeball to eyeball with a child who's about to flip their lid, they go even farther down into their brainstem. So what we're taught is to, instead of going face to face, you kind of use you as an example, Steph. So you get down at their level, you go parallel. So your eyes are not connecting, you're going parallel, you're not making eye contact, and you lean down at their side. And instead of saying, I need you to stop doing that, whatever the activity is, you never give a directive, you always turn it into a question. It would be something like this: hey, what do you need to be doing right now? Oh, and then you may get a rah, rah, rah. Well, okay, I'll check back in a couple minutes and make sure you're on track. And then you get out of there. Or you might say, hey, what's our agreement about using blocks in this classroom? I'll be back in a couple of minutes to check on you. I never stay and hover. I never stay and put that pressure on the child, because that's like that graph that we saw where you go up, 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 and you're challenging. I ask a question, which causes them to go to the upper region of their brain, hopefully, and then I get out of there to give them a chance to correct it. So this is a lesson that I learned my first year as school site principal. I got the call. This is when I was very green. And got the call, there's a second grader throwing chairs. So, I run down and I get this little guy and I pull him out and I bring him into my office and I sit him down at the table across from me and I close the door and I try to get him to tell me why he was throwing chairs. He had a flip lid. He felt very threatened. He was new to the school. He didn't know me. I was not a safe adult at that time. He ended up thrashing my office and then he attacked me. And I had to put him into a full restraint. And it was one of the worst days of my life. I mean, I cried quite a bit afterwards when it was all said and done. And what I quickly learned was you don't ever bring a frightened child into an office and close the door, 4 walls. You walk with them. Walking is very rhythmic and regulatory. So from then on, you would see me on my campus walking next to a child around the perimeter of the campus, or we would walk on the inside of the cafeteria if I thought that the child was flight risk, or if it was raining, we'd go into to the gym. Walking is very rhythmic and regulatory. The other example, we have a car up here because if you're somebody who travels very much, or if you travel with colleagues, you will likely share more with them. Like if you're traveling any amount of distance, an hour or 2 is usually like the minimum. You will typically share way more about your personal life while in the car than you ever would sitting at a table back at your office, right? I understand this concept, and Stephanie and I travel a lot. We still share way more about our personal lives than we ever intended, because you have 2 things going on in a car. The whirring of the car motor mimics the heartbeat. Last time we talked about how powerful those neural patterns are, but you're also moving at the same pace at the same time. So you have parallel placement and you have the heartbeat. That's why a lot of times I take my son for a drive when he won't go down for his nap and he falls asleep within 15 minutes, because the whirring of the car motor mimics that heartbeat, and it chemically relaxes the brain and the body. So you can use this in all contexts of your life. I have a niece who came from a lot of trauma, and the times when she shares the most is when we're standing at the counter, parallel, prepping dinner. That's when she'll share a lot with me, when it's just the 2 of us, where she feels safe, and that's when she just starts talking about things and processing. So if you haven't experimented with parallel placement, I encourage you to do that. And just even tomorrow with somebody in your life or with a student, go parallel. All right, so these last two slides, and then we're going to move into our resilience and restorative practices talking. But these are things we do in classrooms. We've already talked about most of them from last time. Oops, push that over. One that we didn't talk about last time, and it's really just a teacher kind of a thing, is learning targets with motions. And the research behind that, I'll just write it here on the board. If you are a teacher, ooh, that's a sad pen. The research about learning targets, he actually calls them learning intentions, is John Hattie. And he actually has a correlate. He's done meta-analyses all over the world. And he can basically go in and change one instructional strategy in a classroom and then have a correlate in terms of, let's like a 1.0 or whatever it is. So this one, a learning target or learning intentions, you have the ability to move a student 1.5 years up in a grade level in one school year just by implementing this practice and involving the students in the process. So John Hattie is where the learning, we call them learning targets, but he calls them learning intentions. And the other researcher that we use is because we put motions to the learning targets, basically you're just calling out the Common Core standard, whatever it is you're about to teach. You're just letting the kids know, and you say, I can, or we will, whatever it is that they're going to do. But we use whole brain teaching from Chris Biffle as the body movement, the research behind that. So Chris Biffle, he has a free website. He's the one who, if you've been in classrooms and you hear, class, class, yes, yes, that's Chris Biffle, or mirror with words, where you have the students move their bodies in order to remember what you're teaching them. I was in a school with a teacher that I was coaching, and she had a young man sitting in the back of the room who has all kinds of sensory integration issues. And I got there after she had taught the learning target, and I just sat down next to him and said, hey, and I said his name. So what are you guys learning? What's the lesson about today? And he said, oh, Mrs. Rizzi, I will. He walked, like he acted it out, and then he turned to me and said, oh, we're going to read an expository text, and we're going to look at the author's viewpoint, we're going to write it, so then he could tell me about it, because he had moved his body in a way to help him store it in a different part of his brain. So that's learning targets. Relational health, we know how powerful that is. We know that every one of us is the person that mitigates stress by providing relational health. We teach kids about their brain, and we prepare them for learning. We know that if we're about to dose kids with a certain amount of stress, or we know if they're about to go do something that we know is going to kind of be taxing for them, we do something calming. We do something that's rhythmic, that's regulatory. We play music that will calm them down. We incorporate something funny to infuse those endorphins. We know what we need to do to allow them to remain in the right part of their brain so we don't have behaviors popping off. Rhythmic regulatory activities. Brain breaks throughout the day. I do them about every 35 minutes, depending on what we're doing in the classroom. A social contract, that comes from capturing kids' hearts. I never have rules posted. We always decide on what do we want this classroom to feel like? How can we do that? And we make a list on the board, and then we vote on the top 4 or 5, and they are agreements. They're not rules, and then we all sign it. I love it because there will be a behavior in a classroom, and instead of saying, we're breaking one of the rules, I will say, hey guys, what do we need to do to get back in line with our contract? And I have them tell me what it is, because they created the contract. So it's a completely different way of experiencing it. We put students in service. A lot of our kids from trauma don't have a lot of self-worth, and most of them love to be put in service. I was meeting with a teacher today who's dealing with a really difficult 3rd grader. And we talked about how powerful it would be if he incorporated that. He said, oh yeah, I can send fake notes to teachers all over the campus. I can have him take them all over. I'm like, exactly. If you see he's getting ready to lose it, you see those warning signs, give him a note, have him take something to the library or the computer lab, whatever it is, to put him in service. One school taught me that they actually have a colored folder. So if Debbie and I were team teaching and I had a kid that was about to flip, I would say, hey, Jonathan, could you please take this over to Mrs. Sterling's classroom? And he would show up there. She would see the colored folder and know, oh, he's about to flip his lid. And she would do something like, oh, hey, before you go back to Mrs. Rizzi's, could you please stack these papers or sort these papers for me? Let him get his lid on and then send him back. I will tell you that middle schoolers figure that out. They figure out what you're doing, but they go along with it because they get that you're trying to help them, so they don't lose it in front of their peers. Weaving choice. One of the schools that I have worked with is on this campus. If you're there, it's a K-8 campus, and you are severely emotionally disturbed and you're on an IEP. All we did a few years ago, because these kids hate writing. I mean, they all have to take the CASP assessment, even though. And it was always a struggle to get them to write. And we just wove choice into what we were doing with them. Do you want to handwrite it? Do you want to type it? Do you want to be at a standing desk? Do you want to be sitting in the beanbag chair? Do you want to do it on the iPad? Do you want to sit at the computer terminal and type it? Do you want to do a narrative based on the text we just read, or would you rather do an opinion piece? I mean, these kids are like, oh, well, I'm going to be over here in the beanbag chair with the iPad, and I'm going to do a narrative, and I'm going to create. They were writing. We didn't care how they did it. They were in control. All of a sudden, they were in control. They had autonomy, and they were writing, and the writing samples were amazing. So that's what we know to do. Restorative practice is what we're going to talk about. I apologize. When you have braces, your mouth gets so dry. But parallel placement, we talked about that. Growth mindset is huge, and I know a lot of schools are doing that. We talk to kids about the power of yet. It is so common to hear, these work avoidance kinds of phrases. It's too hard. I can't do it. I just can't do it. You just can't do it yet. Your brain just hasn't learned the right way yet for you to be able to produce that work. And we let them know that we're gonna be a team member with them as their brain learns how to do it. Posting your daily schedule, that's an easy one that a lot of people don't typically do. It's actually really research proven that if you have a schedule on the board that breaks your day apart, that at 10 o'clock kids know they're gonna do math, and they know that at 10:30 they're gonna have break, you'll have kids that will look back at the schedule and look at the clock, look back at the schedule and look at the clock, because it's predictable and it creates a safe environment for them. And you have to stick to that schedule. They can regulate, they can help them, they can stay calm even if they're a little bit hungry, if they know that at 10:30 they're gonna have a break and they're gonna get to eat their snack. When you don't have a schedule on the board, they feel kind of like a leaf blowing in the wind and they don't really know what to expect. And for teachers who all of a sudden on a whim decide, oh, I don't think we'll do math today, I think we'll do this instead. That's very dysregulating for kids who come from trauma. Because while you might think it's okay to do that and just be creative, for them it's jarring. And a lot of times you'll see behaviors happen after you do something like that. So when I work with school districts, we typically then, like as a staff, we'll sit down and say, so of all the trauma-informed practices that we have learned about through different trainings and resources, what are 3 that we think our school could adopt so that we could write that into our LCAP plan, so that if a visitor came onto our campus and went into any one of our classrooms, these are some practices they would see. That's usually one that's a pretty easy, low-hanging fruit. Yeah, we can all agree that we're going to post our schedules, So just as an example of some of the work that schools are doing. Definitely another one I always hear is the brain breaks, that they all think that they could do that. Weaving humor, of course, those endorphins are so great. Playing a simple little game for 1 minute, and the kids are like, oh, we're playing a game. Little do they know that you've woven social emotional, skills into that game, relational skills into that game. And it changes the energy in the room. It relaxes everybody, and then you can go on to do what you were about to do. Music is so powerful. Music is the heartbeat. Whether it's calming music because you need to calm them down, or whether it's fast music so that you can get them amped up. If it's drumming, I was with a community day school staff yesterday afternoon working with them, and one of the teachers told me that, well, one thing she said, I tell the kids, because she's with 5th and 6th graders, she said, I tell the kids, I need a brain break. I need you guys to do a brain break. I need to breathe. And they love me, so they're like, okay, we'll do a brain break with you, and they all go through it with her. Really, she knows that they need it. But she also does, she said, the song, we will rock you. She plays that, like to get them to drum on their desks. And it's like this thing that they do just to regulate them. So they're all in unison and they're drumming together. And then, she stops it and then she starts on with her next thing. So I thought that was a great example. And then we know about cool down corners. A lot of schools now have sensory rooms, or they have cool down corners in an area of the room. Sometimes a student, hopefully most of the time, they can just go to an area in the room. A second grader that I'm working with has a backpack behind the teacher's desk, and his mom put snacks in it. He has fidget toys, he has squeeze balls, he has things he can smell. He has headphones he can put on and listen to some calming music. So it just depends on the student, and it depends on the grade level. But you give them that out, and then they have a limited 5 to 10 minutes where they can go and do that, regulate, and then come back and join the class. Thoughts or questions on any of those? Kind of going through them quickly. All right. If anybody who is tuning in has questions, I think my email is on the very first slide, and anyone can email at any time. Or they can email in. Okay, so this is the last slide, and then we're going to get, and then we have a brain break, and then we'll get into the resilience piece. One of the tools that we are seeing spread across California in many schools is a thing called tapping. And a lot of people have heard of it, but if you haven't, it's one more tool to add to your toolbox if it's something that works for you. Some schools are using EFT tapping, emotional freedom technique tapping. And this is a great video. It's a short video about what it looks like in schools right now. This is a website that tells you more about it. And then these two websites are about a type of tapping called TTT, trauma tapping technique. TTT, just this last year, was validated through the Huffington Post as a form of treating veterans with PTSD, because it's an ancient science, and I'm not an expert on it, but it's an ancient science where you tap into these meridian points on your body. They're basically energy points that physically run throughout your body. And this is, if you go into your smartphone and you type in your app store, it's a free app, self-help for trauma. This little winky character will show up, and he's a prisoner of war. He's coming from a refugee camp, and he's coming across a boat. Some teachers don't show the first part of the video because it looks a little bit sad. But some teachers do, because they say, that's how my students feel. They feel like their lives have come from a place of darkness. But basically, this character walks you through tapping. It's about a 4.5-minute video. You tap on the right side of your body, and then you turn and you tap on the left side of your body. And this video is of war-affected children in the Congo, where, and the reason that they do TTT in a lot of parts of the world is because it doesn't require any words. You can go anywhere, into any concentrated, anywhere, and have kids do TTT, or any adults. A lot of adults use tapping. I use tapping in my own life. It downregulates your system. It calms you down. If you, a lot of moms will say to me, my daughter has such high anxiety. It's painful, like certain things in life are so painful for her. And then she'll learn tapping as something that she does in the evening before she goes to bed. And these are the meridian points. I'll just tap while I'm talking. And we have seen huge differences in children's ability to go to school in the morning and deal with things that are stressful for them, because this tapping on these meridian points is very downregulating. At the training that I attended, the trainer, her name's Kristen Miller, she asked us to focus on something that was stressful in our lives, not a 10, on a scale of 1 to 10, about a 5. And so I picked a 5, and by the time we were done tapping, both left and right, I feel the issue that I was holding in my mind was completely resolved. It was something that happened at work. Sorry, then you go to your fingers. It's amazing. You can do this experiment while you're watching the Winky video to just see how you feel after doing this sequence of tapping. Then you, after that, you take 2 deep breaths, and then you switch and you go to the other side of your body. You do this here, 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 here. Here, oh, I forgot. One of them is under your arm. Some teachers don't do that one because it's a little uncomfortable because of where it's located. But I did ask if I only had a short period of time and I couldn't do all of those, what would be like the most powerful points, if I just needed to quickly downregulate. So I was told here, 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 and here. Those are the 4. So when I'm kind of having a hard day and I'll just step into the restroom and I'll just do that. Or sometimes when I'm driving, this is like with little children, we tell them put on their fake mustache. Press on your fake mustache, because this is a point, it actually helps calm you down. If you think about how you behave sometimes in social settings, a lot of times I'll stand and I'll do this. That's a meridian point. It actually helps calm you down. So, right? So if you just think about where you place your hand when you're, it's just fascinating how There are so many things about our bodies that can help calm us down naturally. EFT uses words and affirmations. So we were filming a video at the beginning of the school year with a third grade teacher who uses EFT, and it was something like this. And she starts her day like this. Our kids come to us with these really deep held beliefs about themselves that they aren't worth very much, at least the kids from trauma do. So she starts her day like this. It's a call and so she's saying it and then the kids are repeating after her. So when I was in her room, I heard it went something like this. I am a member of this community. And then the kids repeat, I'm a member of this community. I'm capable of anything I set my mind to. I'm capable of anything I set my mind to. I care about the people in this community. I care, like, and so she's saying these things as she's tapping on the meridian points, and it's like it's hardwiring these positive affirmations in the minds of these children. And then she turns it over to them. So I heard things like, I'm a good soccer player on my soccer team with my friends. I'm a good helper at home with my mom and the baby. I love to play basketball. I'm really getting better at basketball. And it was, I mean, I tell you what, I had tears in my eyes, I had goosebumps to see these children developing this sense of self through this systematic, every day they're doing it a little bit each day, it takes a few minutes, and they are developing different mindsets about themselves. Just incredible. So EFT has words, TTT doesn't. So now you've been exposed. Today is kind of a drive-by. We're not going to go deep into any one thing, but I want to expose you to some tools that are out there. So if you hear one that does interest you, you can dig deeper and find out more about it. And then some websites that go along with them. All right, so how are we doing on time? This is another funny one. This comes from that 101 Brain Breaks book also. If you need a focusing break because the kids are kind of squirrely and you're all over the place and you need to focus, this gets you back into your body. If you stick your thumb up and your pinky up and then you switch them, I have to consciously think about it. You switch back and forth. You can actually train your brain to get really fast at this. I don't know if I told you this last time, but Josh, the author of that book, that Brain Breaks book, one summer he bought one of those bikes where if you turn it to the left, it turns to the right. Did I talk about this last time? And vice versa, I know. Trudy? He, over a month's time, every day, he got on this bike, and when he turns it to the right, it actually goes to the left, and vice versa. And he built a pathway in his brain so that he had automaticity with being able to ride this bike, because he works with a population of kids who have lost hope. They can't see themselves in their own future because of how dismal their experiences have been and the mistakes they've made. They don't feel that there's a positive future for them. He wanted to prove to these high-risk students he was working with that the brain is elastic and that there's always hope. All it takes is setting your mind on something. Whatever you focus on, you grow. And so he takes them out to the parking lot and he shows them this bike. And these boys are like, I can do that. Let me get on that bike. They get on the bike and they wipe out. Because it's so counterintuitive to what you're used to doing and having experience. So the brain is elastic. What you practice repetitively, you build pathways. All right, so let's do this. That's kind of a natural break. Let's take about a 6-minute break, bio break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about resilience and restorative practices. Sound good? All right. I tell you, it is the weirdest thing to be talking and making eye contact to people in the room and then trying to make eye contact with it. Okay. Okay, welcome back. All right, for our last hour together, we're going to talk about resilience building, intentionally building resilience, as well as then a drive-by of restorative practices, the why of restorative practices, and then a couple of elements of what it looks like. So this is odd for me. I don't typically read slides, and I don't know what the folks can see. Can they see the words on that slide? Oh, okay, I'm going to let you read that slide then. So when you think about this, if we build resilience, then the stress that students are experiencing, they will actually experience at a decreased level of input. As we increase resilience, the experience of stress decreases. So there's tons of research around resilience. Obviously, the book that we talked about we highly recommend. But these next two slides give examples of ways that you can intentionally build resilience in young people and in really anybody. We know that the first one, building relationships. One thing I did one time with my staff was, in a confidential way, I just brought a list to one of our staff meetings of all the students who we used Power School at the time, of all the kids that had the highest number of referrals to the office, our frequent flyers. And I just put their names up on the wall, and I gave teachers little circle stickers, and I asked them to go and adopt at least 2 kids that were not in their class, so that then those teachers went around the school, they would find those kids at recess, in the cafeteria before school, at sporting events, and we just check in with them. Hey, how's it going? Hey, what's your mom up to? What'd you do over the weekend? Just so that there was another adult that they could connect with on the campus, because we know how important relationships are. Executive functioning. Executive functioning, one of the slides we looked at last time talked about how your environment and your experience change the way your frontal lobe wires up. And so for a lot of kids, a little guy that I'm working with right now, his executive function score on a scale of 1 to 5 is a 1. It's very low. His brain, he didn't come wired up that way. He comes from a pretty traumatic home life. So we're intentionally working with him and supporting him and scaffolding for him how to develop organization in his life, how to keep a chart of his homework, to set a goal and then check the goal, to do things that are systematic, that are organized, establish routines, provide opportunities, because the same thing with the social connections and coaching, the creative play, they don't do that naturally. And that's sad, because that's what children should be able to do, right? Is to play and be creative and imaginative. But if they've come from an environment where their brain wasn't allowed to do that, they don't naturally fall into that mode of just behaving like a child. So we have to actually create opportunities for them to do that. Creative play, board games, because that's kind of a more structured experience, games involving memory, and then leadership opportunities, building experiences. Stephanie, a colleague, you were talking about how you worked in a school where the kindergarten teacher went around and empowered because you have these helpless hand raisers in the cafeteria. I can't open my mustard, I can't open my ketchup. And she went around and taught them a technique, right, of how to do it on their own. So they were independent. They moved to that level of independence, which really helps to build that internal executive function for kids. So we talked to them about the science about a regular mindfulness practice. Waking up in the morning and stretching your body. If you're feeling anxious in wherever you are, giving yourself permission to stop what you're doing and breathe in the way that we teach them, belly breathing. Take 5 breaths, give yourself the gift of breath. We explain the science to them of why we ask them to do that, and then they're way more likely to do it. The kids at juvenile hall last week were like, how do you do that breathing? Like, they want access to this. They want these tools. They want to know how to get control of their lives. Exercise. This is so fascinating to me. The spine, our spine and our feet have the majority of the joints in our bodies. And when you activate them, when you exercise them, when you move them, it actually calms your stress response system. It sends endorphins to the brain that calm you down. And in the research that I read, they talked about, like, the best kind of movement would be like belly dancing. If you think of moving like seaweed in the ocean, or like swimming in a swimming pool. Sometimes when I'm in a swimming pool, I just move around like this. That actually is so calming and relaxing to your body because it's activating those joints. So our bodies hold stress like this. Stress contorts us. We become contracted. By moving, we release stress. It's so critical to move and release stress. So exercise is huge. In fact, speaking of which, let's learn a brain break. It's not in your notes. This brain break, and it requires us to stand up, but it's a fun one. It's a fun one. This is called the blowout. Because for some kids, if I feel like we've just done something tense or stressful, and I feel like the kids just need a release, like it's one of those times where you need to do that isometric or that heavy muscle movement. So the training I attended, we learned this as the blowout. An amazing woman in our community named Kristen Miller. So what you do is and then I'll teach you, because I was at a training, and the gentleman next to me works at One Safe Place as an intake officer for these really damaged, broken folks that have been through rough experiences, and he's the first one that they see. He morphed the brain break. He morphed into something, and so I named it, his morphed version of it, I call it the wood chopper. But I'll teach you the original way first. This is the blowout. And basically you stand and you're gonna stretch. It's a really nice, beautiful stretch. As you're stretching, you take a deep breath in, so it's like this, and then you hold it for 2 seconds when your arms are above your head. You hold it, and then you just do this. Like you're throwing it all on the floor. We'll try that again. And part of the power in it is the vocalization of of you just let it all out. Again, it's like that humming that we did. It's that causing a breath and the vibration of that vagal nerve that causes the relaxation. So we'll do another blowout. Okay, here we go. So this is what he did, and kids love this. We're gonna do the same thing, but when you get up here, I want you to imagine that you have a 2x4 in your hands. And when you come down, your knee is gonna come up and you're gonna break the 2x4 over your knee. So it's gonna be like this. And we'll do one knee and then we'll do the other knee, okay? Here we go. Shake it out. You have to take a breath in between or you'll hyperventilate. Now we'll do the other knee. By the way, another natural thing that calms the body, it just made me think of this. If you've ever noticed, like I have dogs, if you've ever noticed an animal in the wild, I see my dogs do this. They'll see a squirrel in the backyard and they'll both take off after the tree where the squirrel is. They run over there. And the first thing they do, because their hair's all standing up, the first thing they do after the squirrel goes up the tree is this. They shake it out, right? They shake. That is their way of releasing the stress that their body held when they went after the squirrel. We have the same ability to do that. So sometimes in classrooms, I just have kids shake. You take your heels and you just knock your heels into the ground. You actually have an area under your foot, just under your arch, that when you do that, it activates your immune system. So if you've got a lot of sick kids, you can just shake. I know it seems silly, but you're actually activating your immune system. I can't tell you the why on that, but that's been explained to me and scientifically. And just shake. You just shake out your stress, just like animals do. All right. Now, do we feel better? So exercise is so critical. Movement. Okay, so these are the other resilience pieces. Things that we can do to build resilience explicitly. Building feelings of competence and mastery. Helping others is huge. Acknowledge strengths, and I know that, we know to do that. We know to focus on people's strengths. It gives kids who don't believe in themselves permission to believe in themselves and to take those risks. Talk about the brave things they do, their effort when they do something difficult, and then encourage them to make their own decisions, and then stand back and be okay with that. It's an amazing thing. Even with my 3-year-old son, he'll do something. I'll step back and he'll do it. I know you're going to think I'm totally crazy, but we're painting our house. We had to fire our painter, so I took over the painting job. And here's my 3-year-old, and I'm painting a wall in my dining room. And here he is painting right with me, and he's getting paint. I'm like, okay, sweetie. And then I'm showing him how I'm cutting in on the baseboard, and he desperately wants to be like, the adult. So I said, but your job, buddy, is you're going to paint on the big parts of the wall. And I show him flat. I look over, and he's painted the whole white baseboard the color of the wall. And I said, Xavier, Jacob, Rizzy. He looked at me, and I said, you know what just happened? Your brain just grew a little. Your brain just grew a little. You just learned one thing that you don't do when painting is you don't paint the baseboard. The baseboard needs to stay white. And I went and got a wet towel, and I'm like cleaning it up as fast as I can. But we do that, and we step back, and we allow people in our lives to grow in that way. Sometimes they make a mistake, and that's okay, and then they learn how to do it on their own. I think the most powerful element on this slide is the next one, optimism. They've done studies, Susan, they've done studies of people who have gone through really traumatic events in their lives, and the one key factor that stands out for the people that have been able to be resilient are the ones that have an optimistic viewpoint of the experience. There was a newscast a few years ago when the Napa fires were happening, and they interviewed this couple. They were standing in front of their home that had completely been leveled. And the newscast was asking this couple, how are you coping with this? And the woman said, you know what? It's just things. It's stuff. We have each other. We're like, we have each other. We're gonna rebuild. We're gonna be okay. And then they pan over to another family. Same thing, lost their home, and these people are devastated. And this is unbelievable. We believe this happened. This is traumatic. Who's to blame for this? And just really were their attitude was completely different than the optimistic attitude shown by the first couple that was interviewed. And so there are ways that, some people are just wired up, they're born that way, they're more optimistic, but it's actually something that we can help train the young minds of those who we work with to actually think in that way, through actually walking through life and experiences with them. And when negative things happen that appear negative, we put a twist on it, we put a spin on it. We say, I could have been devastated that my son painted the baseboards. But I turned it into that's okay, sweetie, you're learning. That's absolutely fine. And I turn it into something we celebrate instead of a devastating experience. Interpret failure as opportunity. Encourage them to set their own goals, challenge negative explanations that they might come in with. And you get a lot of negative explanations. What I've learned to do, which I didn't know how to do before, I was actually talking to a teacher about it today, is a thing called reflective listening. And this is what I used to sound like. When a student would come to me and say, this sucks. I hate it at this school. I don't have any friends. And I can't do math. I can't ever figure out how to do math. I used to say, oh, sweetie, yes, you do. You have friends. I've seen you out on the playground playing with, Jonathan and Lisa, and, and you do too know how to do math. I was in your class last week when you were helping the student next to you complete your problem. What I didn't know that I was doing was invalidating how that child felt about their feelings in that moment. I was rushing to affirm him. I'm thinking of a boy that used to come into my office and say things like this. Instead, what I've learned through the Trauma Academy is reflective listening. So now here's what you hear me say when a child comes in and has those kinds of rants. Wow, that sounds like it would be really difficult. It sounds like that is really a struggle for you. I'm so sorry to hear that. Yeah, it is, Mrs. Rizzy. And you know what else? And then, wow, that does sound difficult. I reflect back. It sounds like you're telling me this is how you're experiencing this. By doing that one thing, all of a sudden they're validated. She gets me. My voice has been heard. She's holding my emotions. She's a safe adult. Then I can typically say, is there anything that I could do to help you with that? Well, I don't know. Well, would you be interested in hearing what some other kids have done in the past with a similar situation? All right, yeah. And now all of a sudden their brain is in a place where they can hear a suggestion, whereas me trying to prove them wrong and trying to tell them, no, you're wrong. You do have friends. No, you're not bad in math, even though that's their experience. I've learned how powerful that is to build relational health and to validate kids and challenge negative explanations, but in a way that you weave that reflective listening in. Of course, we don't want to be helicopter teachers. We don't want to rush to their rescue. Balance your responses. allow them to navigate the stress in a healthy way. Stress is actually a healthy experience for us for the most part. Stress, you know, if you think about being an elastic or a rubber band, we're meant to stretch and allow stress. But there are healthy ways of doing that. And we don't want to stress them out in unhealthy ways where we break them, which is what some of their life experiences tend to stretch them to the point of. So we balance it. And then we talked about this in the slides of classroom practices, but a growth mindset, the power of yet. And for a lot of kids from trauma, they've proven that the most difficult academic content subject is math. And so for kids who really struggle with math, they will quit, and you will see work avoidance as soon as they know that we're switching to math. So what we do is we teach them the power that of, yeah, sweetie, I am going to help you. We're going to do this together. Your brain just needs to learn it in a way that makes sense for your brain. We're going to figure out which way that is, and I'm going to team up with you on that. How nice for somebody to tell you that. Now I think I can dose myself with a certain amount of stress to be able to accomplish that. So those are the slides on resilience. Again, this is a drive-by because we only have a short period of time to be with each other this evening. But those are just some things to get you started if you hadn't already thought about intentionally doing these activities with kids. All right, so we're going to transition into restorative practices. This training and these slides that I'm sharing with you come from the International Institute for Restorative Practices. That's the training that I'm receiving. Anybody can receive this training. My colleagues and I travel to South San Francisco down near Burlingame and are being certified. In June, we'll be fully certified. But I just wanted to give you a taste today of the why behind, what are we talking about when we say restorative practices? What are the elements of it and why? What's the science behind it? So I'll let you read that slide. Isn't our goal to build social responsibility in our communities? It's one of the things that a lot of business owners come back and say to high school teachers and administrators, what has gone wrong with our youth? Where is their level of responsibility, of their integrity? So this process is actually a powerful way to help weave that in and build pathways in the minds of the young people that we work with. So what I want to do, this is an amazing website that we just happened upon. San Francisco Unified School District is completely open and they offer all of the tools. If you go to that link, you'll see there is a wealth of information. You certainly need to be trained on this to really have a grasp of it, but I wanted to share with you about 1 minute and 11 seconds of a video. You're gonna help me with that? Thank you. Just as an overview of what it looks like in, and this is K-12 across every grade.
Restorative practices has really changed the school environment.
There is a calmness and a consideration that's coming out that wasn't there before.
And you can say exactly what you've been needing to say.
I think the kids are really, really responding to it.
It helps me think about what other people really like about the world.
Well, what I like about circles is that everybody gets a turn.
We need to talk to our kids. We need to create these relationships.
It's all about building relationships.
They are able to believe in their own feelings and to share their own feelings.
You get to say everything you want to say, and people listen to you.
It truly is something that's allowing our students to believe that they feel safe and to believe that they feel cared about within our community.
It made me feel like a part of this class. It made me feel special.
I think it's really transformed our school. We're working towards building the kind of school that we want.
It's a great video, but we didn't have time for a 14-minute video, so we just got a taste. So it is really, to me, I feel like if schools want to be trauma informed, this is the next step. This is the next step because we know that typical behavior plans don't work for these kids, these at-risk kids whose neurology is very different. They don't respond to a typical behavior plan. This I'm going to read because it is so powerful. I love when we read it, when my colleagues and I read this initially, we were like, oh my God, this is so true. Everybody needs to hear this. The fundamental hypothesis of restorative practices is that human beings are happier, more cooperative and productive, and more likely to make positive changes in their behavior when those in positions of authority do things with them rather than to them or for them. Just sit with that a minute. I'm going to read it again. The fundamental hypothesis of restorative practices is that human beings are happier, more cooperative and productive, and more likely to make positive changes in their behavior when those in positions of authority do things with them rather than to them or for them. It just multiple layers of meaning in that. So when we talk about restorative practices, you really are including the student in the process. You're not just saying, okay, that's a 2-day suspension, and they go away. You're processing through with them. And there are two main elements that we're going to highlight tonight, and one is circles and one is restorative chats. So what you saw in the video was classrooms sitting in circles, and there are two kinds of circles. There's a proactive circle that a lot of classes start their day, the first 5 minutes they're in a circle, and they end their day in a circle. It's a very powerful way to build community, and it gives all the students a voice. It can be a one-word sharing of something as you go around the circle. And there's a talking piece. You saw in the video they had, a stuffed animal or a globe. And when you have the talking piece, that means you have permission to talk. And if you don't, you're respectful and you listen to everyone else who's sharing around the circle. So those are some of the things you can do in proactive circles: building community, brainstorming, reflecting, introducing new students. You can, if you're about to give the kids a test, you can say, so in today's circle, we're going to review the content of the science standards that you're going to find, and you'll have the opportunity to clarify any of your thinking around any of the concepts that might show up on the test. And as the kids go around, you'll hear from each one of them, well, I was still kind of wondering about mitosis and meiosis. And then there's and then all the kids are hearing that as a review. So circles can be used in lots of ways. Or you can be responding to something that happened. That would be a responsive circle. That's after the fact. Conflict resolution, healing a wrong that has occurred, diffusing tension, family issues, or saying goodbye to a student. I was on a campus a few weeks ago where the circle was held because there was some bullying that was taking place in the middle school. And it's a small campus, so all the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders were actually all brought together in one room. And the administrator led the circle, but it was so powerful because afterwards I talked with a couple of the kids who had been experiencing the bullying, and I said, so what was that like for you? And this 8th grade girl said, I love that process. And I said, well, tell me more about that. And she said, because we get to have a voice, and the people in the room that are saying mean things to us get to hear how it really feels for them to say those things to us. And she said, and it really helps them change their behavior. And the young man shared the same experience, that they were okay with it because they saw an impact that changed behavior. So really powerful possibilities. So activities you can do in circles, I'll just let you read through those examples. As often happens when a teacher has to be out for the day and has a substitute, the report the next day is not always as you would have it be. One way to address that is through a responsive circle, to say, okay, guys, so here's the first question, and each one of you is going to have a chance to respond to the question. How did you feel yesterday while I was gone? How did you feel in the classroom? And have each of them share how they felt. And then you layer the questions intentionally, and then the truth comes out. Well, yeah, we were pretty rude, or whatever it is, as a way of resolving. And how can we fix that? How can we make that better? How can we repair that harm? I love this. Restorative practices recognizes that increasing inappropriate behavior in schools is a direct consequence of the overall loss of connectedness in our society. And this is what circles do. They restore community, accountability, responsibility, support, cooperation, and nurturing. How many young people do you know who will sit next to each other and will text each other? They won't just turn and say, hey, do you want to go get a bite to eat? They're texting each other about where they're going to go get a bite to eat. So we really have experienced a loss of connectedness. Technology is wonderful, and technology is really disabling our communities in terms of connecting and really understanding social emotional nuances of how to behave in the world. So now we're going to talk a little bit about chats, a restorative chat. I love this. Natural consequences are defined as a result or effect of an action or condition, while punishment is defined as something that is imposed on someone, generally with the intention of creating pain and discomfort. Punishment allows for the person to remain a passive recipient without having to take responsibility for their actions. Let's just pause a minute and talk in your table groups. What are your thoughts about what we've talked about so far? Just take a few minutes to process. Let's talk about, what does that mean? What do you guys think about that?
I think a lot of times teachers want to punish. Really, it goes back to that human nature thing, like nobody likes to have things done to them. We all want to have the ability to have some say in how we're treated.
Yeah.
So that's where you get that person that just has to passively take what is dished out instead of looking at it as an opportunity to discipline, which comes from the root of teaching. You know, so just getting people in that mindset, like punishment is not going to accomplish what you want, but discipline can.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's not saying that they get a free pass to do whatever they want, but just being more mindful about.
Exactly.
It's
Yeah. It's a shift in mindset.
I said, here's an assistant principal, all the mistakes I made.
I know, I feel the same way when I learn about those.
The one thing I will say that I think saved me in a lot of cases was if it was a chat between someone who was bullied and the bully, I didn't do this with them because you're re-victimizing the victim and you have them face to face. So I did something different with that. When it first came out, when my voice was doing that, I thought, well, great, they can restore together, but you can't do that with that type of a situation.
You never had any success with that in a bullying situation?
I've been to a training that said don't put the bully and the victim face to face in any kind of a conversation.
Yeah, I'll just give you an example. My daughter's a middle school counselor in Southern California, and there was a girl that was bullied by a group of boys, and she ended up trying to commit suicide. After she came back, after weeks, they actually did a restorative chat with the guys and her, and she was able to share, and they were just like mortified. Like they had no idea that the impact of their words. So I think that
it depends on the situation.
Yeah.
I wonder which training told you that, because we've never been told that.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's
I just never did that.
I wonder if Hope City sends that message, because that's, I think, who trained.
It might have been.
Because I know that Mike went through Hope City and so did I. But that's interesting. That's interesting.
That's probably where it came from.
I'll have to
I
ask
think
him.
you have to be skillful with it for sure.
Definitely, definitely. And you never hold a chat unless both people agree.
Right.
If the victim feels safe enough to be a part of that, and if the person that was demonstrating inappropriate behavior.
But I have done this in front of a parent who always insisted that when his son came to my office, he had to be there. So he and another student had an issue. It's 8th grade boys. And I went through the whole thing, all the steps.
All the questions, yeah.
Whatever. And the dad was very impatient. He would rather, I think, have them duke it out and be done with it. And so then the boys left and he looked at me and he said, whatever they're paying you, it's not enough. Because that was agony for him to sit and it was interesting.
Wow.
But it worked. They didn't have any more issues the rest of the year.
Yeah,
Awesome.
it's very effective. In your experience with the foster youth, do you hear anybody talking about restorative practices? No. It's not like a term that we regularly use. I don't hear this kind of a catchphrase in my world. I think it's something that we might naturally be doing in some cases, but it's not like one of the tools. Yeah, right. No, it's fairly new. I mean, it really is just sweeping through educational systems, but it definitely got started in the juvenile justice system with restorative justice. Yeah. So they've morphed it into restorative practices as a way of being proactive before you got the event. But I could see, like, I work closely with Tracy Neal, and just talking to her about, like, we're training the kids in juvenile hall in restorative practices right now, so that they go out and they have that tool. I mean, there will be kids that will come get you and say, I need to have a chat with Lisa, you know, because and they have the questions memorized, and they want you to facilitate a chat because they want to fix things. They want to be friends again, you know. So it's like a life skill, really, that you're teaching them.
Definitely.
Really cool. Okay, you guys ready to go back? Go back? Okay. All right. So hopefully you all had a chance to process and talk about restorative chats and anything at all around restorative practices. So what are restorative chats? This is kind of just a nice way of explaining what they are. Again, I'll let you read that slide. Can they see that slide pretty clearly? Okay. So it really does have the ability to be an organic process depending upon the student and depending upon the situation. And some people will say, oh, well, what, there's no consequence with restorative practices? You just talk it out and then everybody goes in their own way? No, that's not true. We allow the student who demonstrated the inappropriate behavior, we brainstorm, you know, separately once the chat is over. So what do you think a natural consequence would be? What would be an appropriate consequence for you after having this occur? They usually come up with a worse consequence than I would give them. But I write down a couple, 2, 3 ideas that we talk about, and I'm happy with any one of those ideas. And I usually will say to the child, so I want to know which one of these consequences is going to help your brain grow and learn from this the most. What's going to be the most powerful for you? And I know it sounds counterintuitive, but I let them choose. I don't care. I'm fine with any of the ones that we came up with. It's a very different way of doing discipline, and it's working. We've been, you know, practicing the true definition of insanity for quite a few years now, doing what we've always done, thinking we're going to get different results, and we haven't. And we continue to pass the same, you know, cross section of students along to the next grade, not changing behaviors. They're the ones in the office again the next year. Imagine that. This is the only thing that I've seen change that. It's that pipeline to prison. We're changing it. And this is one of the most powerful practices that I've seen change it. Any other thoughts on that? All right. So here are some secrets to success for a chat facilitator. You would never hold a chat unless both people agreed to it. Like in the case of bullying, if a person didn't feel safe sitting in the room with the person that was bullying them, you would never force that. It's always agreed upon by both people. And both parties have to be regulated. They can't be in their downstairs brain. They have to be in their upstairs brain, in their logical brain, where they have access to the ability to think through what's happening. Sometimes it's tough because the facilitator really has to stay neutral. You can't interject or say something and make a comment about one child, because if you make a comment with one child and you don't the other child, same thing in circles, then other kids are like, well, she said good job to him and she didn't say good job to me. Was mine not a good job? Does she not like do you know what I mean? Like, I have to practice. Kelly, keep your lips closed, don't say anything. So I really just try to practice silence when I'm doing either of these methods. And of course, have a plan. You need to have space to hold a chat. You need to have time. You know, a lot of classroom teachers will say, well, when am I going to hold a chat? I'm supposed to be teaching. The kids come in from recess, and when's that going to happen? I typically will tell kids, and this is where you have a plan. You talk to your administrator, a counselor. If it's a chat that somebody else can facilitate, great. Make a call to the office. When the kids are ready, have them do that. But the better solution is have somebody come take your class and step out in the hall to have a restorative chat. If it's kids in your class and something just went down with them, so you're a part of it, so you understand the nuances of it, because it's sometimes if it's not resolved, it'll find its way back into your classroom, right? I was with an administrator last month and she was facilitating a chat and I thought it was so fascinating. I just want to share this element because she did this without intentionally knowing she was doing it. But so here she is in her office and she's sitting in a chair here. Here is a little boy sitting here who really hurt his friend's feelings at recess. He screamed really loud in her face and she was crying. She's sitting across from him. And this administrator has a table in her office. So this little boy is running his finger and he's tracing the table. And he's distracted and he's feeling anxious and he's having a hard time engaging. And she just inadvertently got out of her seat and went and sat next to him on the couch where he was sitting. And all of a sudden he sat up, he engaged, he could respond to the questions. What she did was she went parallel with him. Parallel placement. Didn't even like intend to do the science of that. She just intuitively moved next to him to help him feel safer. And it changed his entire response to that interaction. So not that you always have to do that, but it was just fascinating to me to be an observer and watch that happen. So it's a very powerful practice to be a part of. So these are the questions, and we carry around little cards because I don't want to try to memorize these questions and then mess up if I'm a little, not completely in my right mind. So we have little cards that have the questions on them. And once you have everybody who has agreed, you've got both parties that are calm, you sit down and you do, because they're calm, you do have them sit opposite each other. You do have them sit eyeball to eyeball, because if Stephanie's sharing, I want to be able to see the expression on her face and understand how that's part of us teaching kids empathy, part of us helping rewire their brain, because a lot of these kids don't have that ability to take the perspective of another. It's their brain didn't wire up. That's one of the deficits with kids that come from trauma. Their brain doesn't wire up naturally in that way. So this is a powerful practice to help teach them that. And then the facilitator sits kind of in between the two. And we always start a chat by saying, so just as a reminder, each one of you is going to have time to talk and share your voice. And when it's your turn, we are going to listen to you 100%. We're going to make an agreement that neither of you is going to interrupt the other person, even though I know you're going to want to, and you're going to want to jump in and say your point. Can we both agree before we start that you're going to allow the other person their turn to talk? Yes. Okay, great, wonderful. And then you start with the child who did the wrong. So, in the case of this little boy that screamed and yelled in this little girl's face, he was asked these questions first. So, Jim, we'll make up a name. So, Jim, what happened? Well, she wouldn't give me the ball, and and then I got frustrated, so then I screamed in her face. Okay, all right. So what were you thinking at the time? And you just walk them through this whole process. Well, I was thinking I was really frustrated with her because I wanted the ball, and she wouldn't give it to me, and that made me feel frustrated. Okay, all right. What have you thought about since? Well, I feel sad because she's crying and she's my good friend, and now I don't know if she's going to want to play with me. I mean, this is kind of what I heard the day that I was observing. So who has been affected by what you've done? Well, she's been affected by what I did. Well, in what way? Well, I don't know. I think I scared her, and I think I scared her. So it allows the child to process through what they did, how they felt, the impact that their actions had on the other person, and then what do you think you need to do to make things right? Well, I don't know. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I did that. And some kids will just go right into an authentic apology. Some kids, when it doesn't go well, won't. And I have ended chats because all of a sudden the person who did the wrong will all of a sudden get defensive again. Well, I did it because she said this, and we never force an apology. And then the next step is an appropriate apology. We never force an apology. I just stop it right there and I say, okay, guys, we're going to go ahead and stop right now. I don't continue if I feel like the person that hurt the other person is all of a sudden defensive about it and isn't in that place. So then we can talk later at another time. but then I allow the person that was hurt to have a voice separately. So they have a way of expressing what happened to them. But in an ideal situation, they say, I need to apologize. And then you say to the person who was hurt, so what did you think when you realized what had happened? You know, and then this little girl was like, I was so embarrassed because all my friends were there when he was yelling at me and I didn't understand why. And I thought he was my friend and it really hurt my feelings. So he's watching her face, he's hearing what she's saying, he's internalizing how it made her feel, hopefully. That's the hope. And then you ask, you know, well, what impact has this incident had on you and others? Well, everybody in the line at recess saw him doing it, and I don't know. And now maybe other people don't want to be his friend because maybe other people think that he might yell at them. And I know he's nice. He just loses his temper sometimes, you know. And so you see where the conversation goes. What's been the hardest thing for you? And that is, like, to me, that's the key question. When you get to that, what's been the hardest thing for you? It really makes them think, like, what has been hardest for me? It really gets to the core of the issue. That's where it comes out. Well, it was really embarrassing. Or, well, I thought he was my friend and now I feel really like alone. And all of these emotions start to come out for kids that know how to express those emotions. What's powerful is, like, a little guy that I'm working with right now, when we look at his rating scale, one of the lowest areas that he scores on a mind map, which we do with the Trauma Academy, is the limbic portion of his brain, because he scores a 1 in the limbic region of his brain. That's where one of his biggest areas of disorganization is, because he doesn't know how to take the perspective of another, and he really struggles to connect with other kids. He wants to be liked and he wants to play with other kids, but he doesn't know how to do it in an appropriate way, and so the other kids don't want to play with him and they don't invite him to play in their games. And so we're working with him, explicitly teaching him how the other kids might be thinking if their face looks like this. Do you know what I mean? And so a restorative chat is a great way of walking kids through that, and teaching them that life skill. So, and then what do you think needs to happen to make things right? And then the person that had the thing happen to them, they can say, well, you know, it would be okay if he apologized, or I want him to promise he's never going to do that again. I want to make sure he's never going to yell at me like that again. You know, and then you bridge that gap, and you do your apology. So that's kind of a classic restorative chat. Again, this is a drive-by, and there are all kinds of little wedges that get, you really have to be on your toes when you're having a restorative chat, because you have no idea what the kids are going to say or what's going to happen. So at formal trainings, we practice a lot. We have a number of scenarios. You have opportunities to practice being the facilitator, an opportunity to practice being the wrongdoer, all the roles you practice being. So we have time. We have time for you to do some processing and thinking about all this content that was just shared with you. Do you want to lead this portion, or do you want me to ask the questions?
Does anybody have questions that they want to ask?
Oh, true.
First.
So is there anyone online that had a question come up at all that right now, if you wanted to type it in, we have some time. We could look at questions. If not, one of the things that, because this whole Strategies 2.0 is intended to have an impact in our communities at a foundational level and to help change lives in a positive way. So one of the things that is being asked is, what are the major challenges in your community? What do you see as the major challenges? Because those are the things that we want to look at. This is intergenerational work. And then how do you think the learning community might help? So if you need a resource, if you need education in a particular area, if you want to be connected to another community that is tackling an issue in a successful way, like other.
Yeah. So we're coming to the end of the season of these learning communities, and Kelly has done such a spectacular way of kind of bringing us to the end of this season, and we're going to be launching into a new season, probably starting in the fall. And so that's when we usually plan and prepare things during the summer and then launch into having 4 of these during the fall. So you all have evaluation forms, And what we're trying to do is kind of get some input in terms of where we go from here. So we're trying to take a look at, we've been looking at trauma and resiliency. We started out kind of thinking about trauma-informed practices, and then we kind of looked at the flip side of that, of how do we build resiliency. We've been looking at different lenses to do that over the past 4 of our learning communities this season. So now that we're kind of moving into the next season, is this a good topic to continue to, Kelly kind of brought out another aspect looking at the restorative practices of things. I don't think we've really discussed that in any way in our previous learning communities. So just looking at, we may have different challenges, and this is a 12-county region, so we may have different challenges in our own community. And what would be helpful is to kind of get a sense of what seems to be kind of a priority challenge in the community where you are, and how could a learning community kind of do something that might be helpful in that challenge. We can't do everything, of course. We're a small piece of the bigger picture, but certainly we're trying to get tools and skills out so that people can use these practices across different sectors. So we realize that schools are a place that see a lot of children. There's no other place that's going to see more children than them in a community. And we really want to connect with kids and their parents in the work that we're doing. But we also realize that in service delivery in general, people are seeing children and families. This is a family strengthening project that we are, really trying to promote. So that's kind of the context for, is there something that really comes up that would be a good next step? Do we stay with this resiliency concept? We've thought about this notion of healing communities, and might that be a good thing to think about in terms of, it kind of just seems like it would be a natural kind of progression. We may not be able to do the training on the healing communities ourselves, although I know Kelly has been trained in healing communities. But is there a way we might be able to promote that in some way through our...
So in their responses kind of hit on that, what would be a need that they would really love support with?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And do we have any questions?
We do have a question from our remote site. The person asked, in our Nurturing Families program, we are told to speak with children at eye level and make eye contact. Given what you told us regarding parallel placement, would you recommend communicating with children?
Great question. I'm so glad that question was asked. The only time when we recommend going parallel is if that child's stress response system has been triggered. A typical interaction with a child, I get down on their level, I make eye contact, so they see that I'm listening and they're heard. That is an absolute practice that we always recommend. Only when that child is agitated and is about ready to flip their lid, that's when I go parallel, because that is calming neurologically to the mind, to the body for that individual. Yeah, great question. Does that make sense, that response? Okay, yeah.
So that was the only question.
Okay.
Right now from online.
And then for their evaluation, where do they fill out their evaluation? Is it online? Is it a piece of paper that was sent to them?
For our online audience, they will have, we have the printed ones for here. Our online audience will receive a link online, I believe, is how those are collected. And then the remote site has printed evaluation.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Well, that is what we had for today. So thank you, everyone, for joining us and tuning in. It was great.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Everyone have a happy summer.
Yes, have a great evening. Yay, 20 days.
I love this idea of parallel placement, working with the 16 to 24-year-olds who would have a mobilized lifetime of trauma.
Yeah.
The most important conversations that I have happen in my car.
Yep. See?
Mhm.
Yeah. And now you understand the science of why.
Yeah.
I've been to 3 different cities where somebody in the audience has shared that in the group home where